Mark Alessandri. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's interesting. The last time we saw each other was actually in person, um, which was an unusual circumstance for a pandemic world we are living in still, but we're living in much more, specifically then in February. And it was our first time getting together in person.
Yeah.
It felt similar to the times we had gotten together not in person, uh, but it was nicer to do it this way for sure.
I'm the same live as virtual.
Interestingly enough, so am I. So I think that worked out well.
Yeah.
Um, and so um, I wanted to pick your brain. You being, an expert in your space that you are, and you've been so accommodating to us as an organization who plays in this place, who works, who focuses in this space, I should say. Um, and we have so much to learn still from, I think, from one another, et cetera. But it's been a great collaboration to date. One thing I wanted to just get his hands on before we get into like some of the meatier parts is,
Yeah.
I'm just curious, is there one thing or more than one thing that you're looking forward to through the end of this calendar year?
Well, for sure, I'm looking forward to seeing our clients live again. I think, since March of 2020, we have been on, as everyone else has, lockdown in terms of client contact. Our center, which is here at the University of Miami, is funded by the state to support clients with autism, families of clients with autism, and also schools and other entities that serve people with autism and related disabilities. And we haven't been able to get into any of those spaces. We haven't been able to see clients at home. We haven't been able to observe them in school. We haven't been able to conduct on-site training. So getting back to a place and a space where we can actually be physically, with our clients and their families and the people who are caring for them is very important to us. We've been able to do very good work remotely, but there is, when you're emotionally connected to the work, as we are in our organization, you do miss that personal connection to the client. So I'm looking forward to that. On a personal note, I'm looking forward to traveling again. For sure. My phone, of course, had to ring just then, and it will likely continue to ring. I'm looking forward to getting on, more flights and being in more places where people are allowed to live their lives again. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to a lot of things this fall.
A lot of commonality there, both on the personal and professional side. We've been operating remotely, since everything, started happening in March 2020. We've actually found it to be pretty productive.
Mhm.
Both from a team dynamic. We tend to have a team that thrives with in the absence of a commute and office distractions. They can just kind of sit down and get their work done, and focus on the clients. And we've actually been able to do that very well. That said, we have gotten together in person on certain occasions, and it's more productive. Like there's just no way. And it may be because we don't do it as frequently, so we take the time to really make it count. Um, but whatever the case is, I enjoy it and I miss it. I do think that we're not going to go back to a full dynamic, a full office, situation. I don't think.
Yeah, I think the same. I mean, we have been. I think the university is encouraging us. I think to be back in August. Kind of full throttle live again. But we have learned a lot of lessons since March of 2020. We are registering more new clients than we've ever registered before because we've developed all these new online systems. We have increased our client contact of existing clients dramatically by 50%, probably, or something like that. We increased the number of trainings we've been offering the community dramatically because we can do it so much more easily from our home environments and our online capabilities. So I do think there's been some upside to this experience in terms of learning, forcing us to learn new ways to deliver services more efficiently and effectively and ultimately having a bigger impact. But yeah, I think as a team, we've been missing those times where we can be in the same space and really bounce ideas off of each other. There is something, online, the remote technologies make things more accessible and efficient, but for me, there's something lacking in terms of the dynamic of the conversation, the dynamic of the problem solving, the richness of the solutions that we're coming up with. I do think we need to be, together to do that. So we haven't been as lucky as you. We haven't been together at all. There are staff members I haven't seen since last March, physically, in the same space. I mean, now that I'm coming to the office periodically, I will run into a staff member here or there, but there are some people, the majority I have not seen live since last March. So, I think it's I think there's a lot to look forward to. I think there's a lot of lessons that have been learned. I do think we're looking at a whole new way of doing business going forward that is really more of a hybrid of some of the things we learned and some of the old ways we were doing things. And I also think we learned of things that we were doing in the past that really don't work anymore, right? So there's going to have to be a lot of adjusting, which is, I say to myself, I'm not getting any younger. I really don't want to keep learning new ways of doing this business. But yeah, there's something exhilarating about kind of what I'll be doing is really stepping into the, in some ways the final leg of my career. I'm going to be 58 this year. So, I'm looking at the end point of the work. And there's something exciting about having to look at that with these fresh eyes coming out of the pandemic, as opposed to just continuing to do the same old thing that we were doing the past 25 years that I've been here. So I see some upside to all of this in that regard.
You also suffer from, I think, the same curse that I suffer from of lifelong learning, right? If you want to call it that. And it's, despite the discomfort it can present and create, it's a fabulous opportunity. And I think in particular, for somebody in your position, but not even somebody in mine as well, to train the next generation of folks who are going to come into this, and give them that perspective, which I think is, it's vastly powerful. One thing I wanted to, I probably should have started with this, and I apologize. I don't do these things often. Would you mind just sharing, for those who may have a chance to watch this, who you are, what you do, specifically?
Sure.
Your role? And
yeah, I'd be happy to. So I'm the executive director of a program called CARD, Center for Autism and Related Disabilities, here at the University of Miami. We're one of 7 state of Florida programs funded by the state for the sole purpose of essentially taking care of any person in the state who has autism and a related disability. So we work at the level of the client, we work at the level of the client's family, we work at the level of the school or the residential placement or the job site that a person with autism might live, work, and play. And we also work at the level of the community. So we're training businesses and law enforcement and first responders. And essentially any person that intersects with a person with autism or any entity is likely to be a client of ours in some capacity. So we've been funded since 1993 by the state of Florida through the Department of Education to do this work. So even though we're a Department of Education discretionary project, that's our technical term, we serve families before they enter the school system, and we serve those clients long after they exit the school system. So we're a lifespan program. I'm also a professor in the Department of Psychology, and I have a secondary appointment in pediatrics, and also serve as the assistant chairman here in the Department of Psychology as well. So multiple hats. I've been in the autism space, if you will, since 1981, when I met the very first person in my life who ever had autism, this boy named Marlon, who was at a summer program in New York where I grew up. And it just changed everything for me. One day with this young boy, I then spent every summer at this summer camp, and then went to college with the intent of studying autism, and then got my PhD and went off to become a professor and someone who hopefully developed some expertise in this particular area. And it's been great. I also do research on top of all of those other things. So we have studies that look at early diagnosis and early intervention, genetic studies, neuroimaging studies, treatment outcome studies, family coping studies, kind of a real interesting array, real portfolio of research that we think is really impactful. I'm only interested in research from the perspective of what does it mean for our clients. I'm not someone who's driven by research as my fundamental mission. I think serving people is my priority, and then if we can learn something about how to serve them better through research, then I'm interested in that. So many hats, a lot of different layers. I think one of the things that has kept me in the business so long is the variety of activities that I get to do. But central to everything I do is just the emotional connection I get to have with my clients and their families. That drives everything for me. And so 1981 is when I met that boy, and this is my 40th anniversary in that regard. And my 25th anniversary here at the CARD Center at the University of Miami. So this is a pretty monumental year for me.
Well, listen, I hope that when you look in the mirror at night, you don't give yourself too much of a hard time for slacking off. But it's interesting, just as you're talking about this, I'm reminded of how we connected, which is a much less impressive story. I'll share it because I'm not sure if you know the whole story. But of all things, I was out at a nightclub with my brother-in-law and some friends of his for his birthday. And I started talking to this guy who was there, a friend of his, who I mentioned what I do for a living, and he mentioned, oh yeah, my sister is kind of involved in something like that. He didn't really understand what it was, and which is very normal for for family
Yes.
members, people in the space or who are connected to the space. And so I said, oh, what is she? So she's a teacher at a school, but she used to work for this guy in some capacity. I said, oh, okay, I'll give her, I'll call her up. I will talk to anybody who knows me knows I will speak to anybody who is connected to this field in some capacity. Any way that we can get our message out, any way that we can potentially collaborate and support folks, I will talk to them. So I figured I'll talk to her. Sure. Long story short, she sang your praise, said you are a mentor of hers. We should connect. When I heard your title and looked you up, I was like, this guy's not going to take the time to talk to me. He's clearly too important. And quite the opposite. You made the time, and we've developed, I think, what I would call a very nice, collaboration and friendship, despite, that fact. How busy you are and how much meaningful work you're doing. So I've always appreciated that, into and including this opportunity here. So
I agree. I just want to say, I'm sorry to cut you off there, but I think I'm like you. I'll take any call. I'll have any meeting. I'll pursue any potential lead that I think could ultimately lead to helping us take care of people better. But I'm also not someone who's easily convinced. So I think for the people watching, they should know that the relationship we've developed, it comes out of my trust in what you're doing and the credibility with which that you bring to this space. I said I did a PR piece for another colleague of mine, and in the video I said, people pitch me all the time. When you're someone who takes care of people with autism, you're pitched everything under the sun, and most of it is hocus pocus nonsense BS that people are just taking advantage of parents' hopes and dreams. But the work that you're doing is brilliant. It's evidence-based, it's really impactful, it's changing people's lives. And I think it's done with a level of sophistication coupled with compassion, like that intellectual sophistication coupled with compassion, I think ultimately is what sells the product. So for me, it was after meeting you the first time and talking through kind of your vision and what you're hoping to achieve just as a human being, trying to help other human beings. That was all it took for me. I understood where you and your whole team were coming from, because there are a lot of meetings I only have once. Not everyone gets a second meeting because my BS radar is pretty strong. So and I don't take any chances with the people that I'm tasked with caring for. So you have to convince me very quickly that your intentions are right. That's really the most important thing to me.
Well, with all due respect to folks around the country and world who hopefully will be watching this, it's probably the New Yorker in you that has that get fine-tuned, sense. I also will tell my team and other folks, there are calls I have, that are half an hour long that it's time I'll never get back.
Right.
It's an important opportunity to learn, kind of to be able to sift through the trees. But there's many calls that I have, again, that you don't know if you don't take the time.
Yeah, I agree. You have to take the time. I feel like I have an obligation to the people I serve to pursue every possible thing that comes my way and then make a judgment call about whether or not I want to bring it to their attention. So the majority don't get further than that first interaction because it's, you have to come ready to really deliver, right? Not some hope and a prayer. I want some real evidence that this might be helpful to someone.
Hope is not a strategy, or certainly one that we don't subscribe to.
Strategy.
Not in this game. It's not a game. I guess that's the point. Yeah. So let me ask you a question. So with respect to the pandemic for a second, have you noticed any positive trends in the world of ASD, autism spectrum disorders? For those who aren't familiar with the terminology.
I think to be fair, it's been mostly bleak. The majority of when you think about those who are really severely affected by autism and their families. It's been almost impossible to access care. It's almost been impossible to access the much needed dosages of treatment that these kids and young adults were getting prior to COVID-19. And so there has been regression. There has been familial, suffering through all of this. We've had clients who've lost both of their parents during COVID-19. So I think for the biggest swath of the population, it's been very impactful and very, problematic. There is a subgroup of clients that we work with who are very happy to stay virtual forever. And in fact, their social anxiety is reduced, their depression is better, they feel more engaged with people than they've ever felt before because of the online platform. So there is a small segment of the population that I think has really benefited. From a service delivery perspective, as I shared before, we've been able to reach more people on a daily basis, impact the community on a broader scale because we have much more of a reach via online platforms than we have live. For me to drive around town to see, because we don't do the clients don't come to see us at Card. We go to see them sometimes they come for intakes, but most of our work is done out in the real world. So for me to see, I could see, 10, 12 clients a day maybe now. I mean, I don't because I have other things to do, but you could never do more than 3 or 4 clients a day if you were doing it the live way. So it's just really difficult to reach as many people. And then we've also trained, through our training platforms, considerably more people than we've ever trained before. So we're getting high quality information out to the people who need it much more efficiently than we were able to do before. So I think on the broad scale, there's a lot of stuff for an organization like mine that has benefited from what we've learned through COVID. But in terms of what really happens to people who have autism and their families during COVID, I think about the kid, they haven't benefited as much. I think about the young kids who are just getting a diagnosis who couldn't access live therapies. You can never get that time back. So you have, a 2.5-year-old, a 3-year-old who really needs intensive ABA, and the ABA providers aren't providing direct service in the homes or in the clinics during the height of COVID. So that was very, very difficult, I think. And it's very difficult to kind of onboard parents in terms of remote applications of ABA-based technologies and strategies, because you have to learn the systems and then you can then implement them through online or remote platforms. But to start remote, that's really hard to do. So there is, I have a lot of worries about this group of kids who were diagnosed over the last year who missed out on that first year of intensive intervention. I don't know that, it'll be interesting to follow that cohort and see what the impact was. But I also worry about that just for neurotypical kids who are growing up right now. No access to, their friends, no access to their grandparents in some cases, limited social contacts with the world. And you wonder how their social communication, motor, and language development will progress because of the lost opportunities for that kind of engagement. So I think there's a lot to be still learned from all of this, and probably it'll take a generation to really understand what COVID did in terms of kids' learning and outcomes, long-term outcomes. But I think we should be very concerned. And I think this is where someone like you and your team comes in. I think we need to think about what that impact might be and how we might layer on some more new kind of innovative supports and techniques for learning that will enhance any of the deficits that might be there because of COVID. Executive functioning is it's great that we're talking about this because, that's fundamentally, I think, the thing that defines who's capable of having a more normal life versus someone who's less capable of having a more independent, normal life, the inability to function, essentially independently. So those are the things that might be the long-term negative effects, even for neurotypical kids, in terms of their long-term outcomes from COVID-19.
Well, a couple things come to mind. First of all, you should, rest easy knowing that we are thinking very deeply and very specifically about ways that we can provide, further supports, both to the folks we're working with now, and also what does this translate into in the future for this population of folks, on the spectrum, not on the spectrum, diagnosed, undiagnosed, who may or will struggle in the future as a result of this gap that has been put upon us. That said, it sounds like your experience to me is a microcosm of the global experience. For the most part, this is not a positive. There's
Right.
ways to find silver linings in this thing, and there are some folks who have catapulted ahead as a result of their circumstances. But all in all, this is not a positive. I don't think anybody, even the folks who are winning, if you will, in this experience, there's some kind of loss. People have been sick or worse around them. Things have been impacted in a way that is, your social life. We are social creatures. We're intended to be together. I would struggle to call this a positive on many levels. But again, it's
Yeah,
you're right.
It's definitely a net negative for sure. I think when you look at it, everything all told, And I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, not that I'm a doomsdayer, but I wouldn't be surprised if, I don't know, 10 years from now we have a kind of a COVID-19 syndrome that's kind of a neurodevelopmental disorder of its own that is a reflection of what kids missed out on in these formative years of development over the last year and a half. Particularly, the kids who are a year and a half, 2, 3, that really need that enrichment that didn't get it.
Look, you're not a doomsdayer, but I would say what you are is you are a trained mental health professional. So I think that you actually have a leg to stand on with these hypotheses, if you want to call it that. And furthermore, I don't think it's limited to children. Frankly, I think that
I think that's a really good point.
I think this is it's now that we're beginning to think about coming out of this, and the conversation is moving away from don't hug people to how do we get back to, some semblance of normalcy, with the reality that there's going to be some components of this that are going to be kind of part of the new reality. I think that your point about there's a likelihood that people will end up studying this. I think that there's people who this is going to be studied up, down, left, and right in ways, the people who lived through this are going to read this in more rich detail than they lived it themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, there's absolutely an element of impact on neurodevelopment, but also you add the layer of post-traumatic stress for many, many people secondary to COVID-19 that I think generations will study, just like they studied 9/11, right? And I mean, not necessarily making a direct comparison there, but trauma is trauma, and I do think this is a pervasive worldwide trauma that will change people. I know it's changed me. I know it's changed my team. I mean, we still have people that we work with that are reluctant to step back into their old life and their old daily routine, and especially in coming to the office and whatnot. So it's going to have to be a slow, gradual re-entry to this life. And I do think, the impact on the way we process information, the way we learn, right, the way we live our daily lives, I think this is where I think the relevance to the work I do every day, the work you do every day for people with particular learning disabilities and other kinds of developmental disorders becomes even more paramount. I think we're going to have to be more sophisticated in the way we think about supporting our clients in this next, this post-COVID world.
Totally. I mean, there's I would argue it's an objective fact that the circumstances that greet an individual on the spectrum are more pronounced than those who are neurotypical. Like it's just a more complicated, set of issues to work through.
Yeah.
So, when you layer on a mass pandemic, a global event, it's just gonna, that's gonna have the same effect. It's just gonna weigh more heavily. And you're right. I think that luckily there are those of us who are curious enough and patient enough and dedicated enough to the work to help kind of close that gap. But it's going to take a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, the disruptions in routine alone could upend someone's life. But when you add all the other things that, the disengagement and the lack of social contact, you add all these other things, and you just, it's kind of unfathomable, really, what the impact is. So I think it'd be interesting to study those who did well, those who didn't do as well, and try to figure out what some of the buffering factors might have been for the ones that actually did do well. But it's the same kind of paradigm that you use with trauma. Like some people respond well and some people respond very badly. And why? Are there personality traits? Are there biological traits? What are the factors that have made some of our kids at my center do well during this period? And what are the factors that have made some not so well? And some of that may be the family system impact, the way parents cope, whether they lost jobs, whether there were financial constraints, how detached they were. Like in Miami, one of the benefits of Miami is you have sometimes multi-generational families living together. So you might have a little bit more social support in a community like ours than maybe you do in some other places where people are more disconnected from their families. And that has maybe more to do with culture than location. Excuse me.
Well, I would say that the benefit that folks, who have the opportunity to work with organizations like yours or ours is the individualized focus, because this is an individualized circumstance and everyone's going to experience it differently, even if they have the same exact profile. They have their own, circumstances. So, again, there's, we have, I think by nature, the work that we do, we have to be optimistic. I don't think you can survive in this and be successful without being optimistic. So I think that we, while you're pointing out some very, real complications in the, the world that we live in today, and you're totally right about them, I also, I can clearly, gauge the optimism that is coming from you, what we learn from this, what we can do about this going forward.
Right. Yeah. I'm endlessly optimistic. I'm kind of delusionally optimistic most of the time. I just think, I've done this for so long, right? So I've seen my way through so many difficult moments, in terms of how autism develops and how, the world kind of reacts to it and what the treatments are that are available for it. So, I've never been disappointed about where we've gone in the field. I think that's what encourages me to keep moving forward. That, yeah, there'll be setbacks, there'll be challenges, but we always figure out a better way forward. It may take a little, loss of hair in my case, and aging and other kind of things that happen to people as they get older, but we've always ultimately moved in the right direction, when it comes to the field in general, and I think that's hopeful.
The arc bends towards truth and justice.
Yes, that's what they say, and I think it's true for all of these kinds of challenges that we experience along the way. I think, gosh, I just did a talk for our community, kind of a keynote on just the historical arc of autism and kind of where we are today. And there's just so many wonderful moments in history where we had an opportunity to go one way or the other, and we always kind of went, the right way ultimately, which I think is good. Starting from the nonsense of refrigerator mothers to kind of where we are today and thinking about, applied behavior analytic techniques in the natural environment, right, through naturalistic developmental behavioral interventions. I just think we just move toward a more kind of optimistic place with history.
Look, I'm with you, and I'm gonna do everything I can to will it that way as well. Let me ask you. I know we might run out of time here, so I want to, this happens to every conversation I have, by the way. I always run out of time. So let me ask you, what's one piece of advice you might share with individuals or their families recently receiving, an ASD diagnosis, and and on the other side of that, for young professionals entering the field, any kind of guidance you might offer?
I think it's a great bridge to what we were just talking about. I think the outcomes are better today than they've ever been for kids getting an early diagnosis of autism. I think the key is early. We actually have a lot of data now, and a lot of information that says you can diagnose a kid with autism really between 18 and 24 months. We're still diagnosing them way too late, but because we have this knowledge, we can move the needle on that and diagnose them earlier. And the ones who get the early diagnosis now, for those parents, I would say, you're in really good shape because you got this diagnosis early. You can get intervention early, and the outcomes for those folks are significantly better, for the most part. We can't guarantee an outcome, of course, but early diagnosis leading to early intervention, and not only early intervention, but higher quality interventions, because we've been studying them over the past, 50 years. We now know better what works for, particular children. And it's not necessarily a this or that. It's sometimes more a combination of therapeutic approaches that are best. And then you have to titrate the dosages, right? So we have some kids who get some ABA, some OT, some speech, and there's some people who are more dogmatic about one or the other, but there are people like me who really see the value in putting together a comprehensive treatment plan for a particular child that adjusts based on what that child needs. And the outcomes are just universally better. That's what I can say. I think there are better education programs. We have more employment opportunities. We're starting to develop more novel, innovative housing kinds of communities, but we're still a long way off in terms of what adults are getting in our community from those who are more impacted with autism. And I would say, on the negative side, if I might, that the autism community still doesn't pay enough attention to those individuals with autism who are more severely affected, and we have to all do better in that regard. But overall, if you got a diagnosis today, I would say find a leader in your community who's an expert in autism. Allow them to help you put together a plan for your child. Stay on that track and trust the process. Trust that the therapies work. Trust that we know what we're recommending. And for young professionals, I would say get into this business. Like, this is, I feel so fortunate that at 17, I met a person with autism. It absolutely changed my life. And the work is enriching. The intellectual pursuits are enriching. The science is enriching. The academics of this are enriching. But the personal relationships, to have the privilege of having personal relationships with neurodiverse people is so invigorating for me. Like, it's completely changed my sense of self, my sense of the world, my optimism about what's possible. Like, just being open enough to meet lots of different kinds of people, and having them in my life has been just altering. It's life altering in every way. So I want that for everyone that comes after me. All my students, I teach students every year, and I always tell them, and they actually leave the course really inspired about doing similar work because they see that I'm still showing up as passionate today as I was 40 years ago when I met Marlon. And I think that's something everyone's looking for in life.
It's a real responsibility that I think somebody in your position, has. And I think that, when you treat it the way you do, it doesn't come off that way. It doesn't feel that way. It just feels like the work and you enjoy it. But you used a word that I really appreciate, and I use myself, the privilege to do this work and to be able to move the needle in any kind of meaningful way. If you can just help one family, I mean, the butterfly effect, or one individual, the butterfly effect is exponential. And you don't even it could change the world. I mean, that's what the butterfly effect is about. It really could have that much of an impact, and it takes, a special kind of person, special kind of people. Our industry is populated with people who could be doing something incredible for the world in any number of capacities. But they do it here, and I feel a privilege. It is a privilege as well to me to have the opportunity to do what we do, and to collaborate with folks like you, and your organization. It's just it is, and it's the future is bright, despite everything else. The future, I think, is bright.
If you do it all with heart and compassion, you never fail. You may not be the richest person in the world, but you'll be the most gratified in every way. You just have to believe in you just have to believe in the work, and you have to believe in the motivation behind it, and do it with all. I mean, I always tell my staff, get rid of the boundaries. I don't want to talk about professional, personal boundaries. If you're going to help these people, you have to be as committed to them as a family member is committed to them. You have to care about them that much to really help them, and for the long haul. So break down the boundaries. I don't want to hear about barriers. I don't want to hear about this is my time off, this is my time on. Like, I work all the time because it's not work. It's a passion to take care of people and to try to help them when they need you most.
Well, it's funny. Everybody at New Frontiers, I don't even need to repeat that for them. They are all way more, skin in the game than I am, and I'm all in. So, we just attract that kind of people to our organization. It's just a core value of ours. It's a culture thing. Mm-hmm. Well, and it's actually, I was going to ask you one more question, but I want to end on the note you just ended on because it was such a beautiful note. I was going to ask you, how do you deal with bringing your work home? You just answered it, so I don't need to.
Yeah, no, I mean it's there's not a differential. Like, it is, my work is my life. My life is my work, and I don't want it any other way.
Well,
I just don't want it any other way ever.
Lucky for your employees, for your colleagues, for the families you work with, the professionals you work with, that's how it is, right? And I think the results, speak for themselves. So let me just thank you again for taking the time. I know you are a busy man. You have a lot of really important things to do. To take the time to have this conversation with me, this is the highlight of my day. I really mean it. It's always a pleasure speaking with you and spending time. I'm looking forward to much more. I know there will be much more, both in person and through other means. And keep up the great work. Thank you, just from on behalf of all of us on this earth. Thank you for all the great work.
And thank you for all you and your team are doing.
I appreciate it. Looking forward to more. All right. Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.